Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis. This is Sam Drew. I'm sorry to say I'm fighting a cold today. I'm with the National Dropout Prevention Center, and I'm here with my co-host and colleague, Marty Duckenfield, who also is fighting a cold. I think it's that season of the year. But we're both in great spirits, and we welcome all of you to this monthly radio webcast brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University, and in partnership with Clemson Radio Productions and the generous support of Penn Foster.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I think we were joking that people would think we had two imposters doing the program today because of these voices. But we're really pleased to be here and to have you join us today for this wonderful professional development opportunity. And we always like to welcome the new listeners to the broadcast. Welcome. We're happy to have you with us. We have an excellent program planned, and, you know, Sam, this is one thing that I think we can agree on. We've found as we travel to different schools, there's a lot of interest in professional learning communities, but also a lot of confusion about what they are and what they can be. And so I know many of these schools are really seeking more guidance on how to make these PLCs work, and so that's what we're going to learn about today, and we're so ready to get started because we all have a lot to learn. Now, first of all, let me remind our listeners of the materials that are provided on the website for today's program. First of all, be sure you have opened up the slide presentation. This is actually a PowerPoint in PDF format, and this will support the discussion today, so have that open and ready. There are some really good articles. I've been spending some time today reviewing these, Sam. You know, the one that says, what is a PLC, which really gives you a good, solid framework that will be wonderful to have after the program today. There's that assessment tool to kind of look at self-assessment and how we're doing. And I really liked looking at that professional teaching and learning cycle. I'm happy to say that is modeled after the principles of the National Staff Development Council, one of our good friends out there in the education world, who
Which has a new name.
They do have a new name. I believe it's Learning Forward.
Learning Forward.
Yeah. So this is just great stuff, and we are pleased to present that for you today. And then we have the website also for Segal, which we'll learn more about in a few minutes. But suffice it to say, it is full of good resources about our topic of professional learning communities. So, Sam, a very focused list of resources this time with great support for learning how to do professional learning communities right.
Well, you do a terrific job of putting those together, Marty. They're always good resources, and they are an important part of this program. There's only so much we can cover in an hour, but there are a lot there for your reading enjoyment later. And I like to say that all I need to know about PLCs I learned on our website.
Yeah.
So I'm particularly looking forward to the discussion today about how to implement this important strategy for school improvement and also in the context of dropout prevention.
Yes. You know, the wonderful thing about these webcasts is that you, the listeners, also have the opportunity to engage in discussion with our presenters, and so we invite you to consider being an active part of the program. Now, there are two ways you can connect to us, and this is a radio call-in show. So we encourage you to call in with your questions for our guests today. We have a toll-free number. It's 888-539-8859, and if you are calling from outside the U.S., I keep wishing. The number is 864-656-4549. You may begin calling in now or any time during the program, and we'll put you on hold for a few minutes, but we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can during the broadcast. Now, all our callers today will receive a copy of a free book from the NDPC Effective Strategy Series, a book of their choice. Eric will take down your email address and phone number, and then we can contact you about which one you'd like to receive. How about that?
That's great, but wait, there's more. Marty, all of our callers are also going to have a chance to have their names put in a hat for a drawing in May. We made this offer during the last radio webcast, and we got some takers. To get a free conference registration to the 2011 National Dropout Prevention Network Conference, which will be held in Chicago. So this will include all the callers from the previous broadcast. So we invite you to call in with your questions or write in with your questions and become a part of this drawing.
And, you know, that is a great offer, Sam. I tell you, I think we're going to be deluged with callers, but we'll do the best we can to get to all of you. But we also do accept email questions sent to our email address, ndpc@clemson.edu. If you put the word solutions in the subject line, that will alert me that this is a question regarding that. So we're going to get to as many of those questions as well. But we're looking forward to all the calls and the questions and your participation, as always.
Good. Then let's move forward. Our topic this month is professional learning communities and infrastructure for dropout prevention and school improvement. And with us today from the NPR affiliate in Austin, Texas, KUT, are Dr. DeEtte Cowan and Dr. Ann Neeley of Segal. And if you're not familiar with Segal, we'll have them tell you a little more about it later in the program. But we're delighted to have you both with us today to share your expertise with us and our listeners on professional learning communities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Professional development for teachers certainly needs to be an ongoing process, and no better way than through professional learning communities to accomplish this, on-site at specific schools with teachers working together for school improvement. That all makes a lot of sense, but how can we do this in a way that optimizes teacher effectiveness? And particularly, how can we do this to strengthen teachers as they deal with dropout issues? Those are some of the questions, really, that we'll deal with today. And we're very fortunate to have you both, DeEtte and Ann, with us today. We know you've been working for years and training educators in the implementation of professional learning communities. And we're going to start with that in just a moment, but let me just remind our listeners once again that they can call us with their questions. The number, again, toll-free, 888-539-8859. If you happen to be calling from outside of the U.S., the number is 864-656-4549. DeEtte, before we turn to your PowerPoint and really begin this discussion, I promised our listeners that they would hear more about Segal. Could you give us just a brief overview of Segal?
Sure. This is a question that's asked frequently. Many people do ask who or what Segal is. Well, Segal's a private, nonprofit education, research, development, and dissemination. We call that RD&D. It's a corporation based in Austin, Texas. For over 40 years, Segal has helped its partners and clients bridge the gap between research and practice with professional development, technical assistance, information services, all tailored to meet specific needs. And we've been around for 40 years, and our projects have changed over time, but our commitment to student success has not. That keeps us focused on what we need to do. During recent years, a large part of our work has helped states, districts, and schools meet the challenges presented by the No Child Left Behind Act using a mix of research-based professional development strategies and resources. So that, in a nutshell, is pretty much what Segal is and does.
Good. Thank you. And of course, the National Dropout Prevention Center and Segal have that mutual goal of focusing on student success, and I know we have had other associations with you during the years and know the good work that you have done and are doing. So I think without further ado, let's begin this discussion then of professional learning communities.
All right. Well, let's turn to the second slide that's in your handout, and just to get a sense of what we know about the dropout situation here in the United States. There are a few figures on that slide that kind of gives you a sense of how serious the problem is. And if you've been studying the dropout situation in the United States over the years, you're aware that It's really hard to believe that in a country with so many resources and opportunities that almost 1/3 of public high school students fail to graduate each year. And that an average of, this is appalling, 7,000 students leave high school every school day. This figure, of course, is even more likely to occur when it involves students in low-income families. So with the knowledge of how important graduation is in terms of opportunities for the future of students, this is really a critical problem facing this country. And if you'll take a look at the next slide, the next two slides really have some characteristics of struggling schools. And these characteristics have been reported by a number of researchers. And I'm sure that many of our listeners who work to improve schools will find these very familiar. If you take a look at those two pages of slides, or two slides, and naturally these characteristics, when they exist in a school, will have an effect on a school's ability to graduate students with the knowledge and skills that they need to be successful. So let's look a little now at what we have planned to learn together today, and we want to review what we think might be of interest in our webcast today. First, we want our listeners to develop a sense of what we at Segal have come to define as a professional learning community, and we've often shortened that phrase to PLC. So if you hear us say that, that's what we're referring to, PLCs. And because data and research are at the core of good decisions, we'll also take a look at some ways that schools that operate as PLCs use research and data to guide their improvement efforts, and particularly those efforts to reduce the dropout rate. We'll next examine some leadership actions that'll help to support and sustain schools that operate as professional learning communities. And last, we'll provide some information that will help our listeners access some tools, resources, and interventions to build a school's capacity to address dropout problems. As Marty stated earlier or Sam, I believe, as you stated earlier in this webcast, Dr. Ann Neeley from Segal is here with me today, and she'll be sharing her knowledge and expertise about school dropouts. Among other things, Ann's going to provide some information about those supportive conditions in professional learning communities that are needed, and how to think about implementing interventions designed to promote high school completion. So let's take a look at the slide that says a professional learning community is not. And we're going to look at what it is not. There's no doubt that you've noticed, as I have, that this term is being heard and used more and more in the educational literature. And while this is really pleasing to us at Segal, that the term is becoming more widespread, we've noticed that the term is being used in a wide variety of ways. Often, we've noticed that it's expressed as an end in itself, so that once a school establishes like a grade level or subject area teams that they call PLCs, they think they've accomplished a major goal. In many cases, we've heard this term referred to any organizational grouping that's been established in the school, like our sixth grade team, PLC, or our math department PLC, with little attention being given to the development of a clear and common focus for the work that these teams do, the norms for interacting, and the behavioral standards to which the staff hold one another accountable, and also little attention to processes for learning collectively and applying that learning in order to improve learning outcomes for students. So looking next at the slide that says what a professional learning community is, for us at Segal and a number of other researchers, we're not alone on this, PLC is really an infrastructure, or you might think about it as an internal support system among the professionals in the school to make better learning outcomes for students possible. So a PLC thus becomes a means to accomplish a larger end, and it's not the end in itself. So it's a way of working together.
So it's both administrators and teachers in a school? Yeah.
Yes. It's all the professionals in the school, and we wouldn't also leave out the paraprofessionals who play an important role in the instructional process. It's the adults in the school that operate as a professional learning community. In fact, if you look at the next slide, what's the difference? I like to refer to the whole school as a professional learning community. And then I've come to like to call each group organized within the school, like, for example, grade level teams or subject area teams, as professional learning teams. However, all on the teams should interact using the standards and principles of a professional learning community. They'll reflect the dimensions that Ann and I will review a little bit later in the webcast.
I have a question here because you just said something that surprised me about the. You think of. I have always thought of a professional learning community. Maybe we'll just say PLC. That's easier to say. As a small group of maybe 5 to 8 people, and yet when you talk about the whole school, obviously that's a whole lot larger. So, is there an element of importance to the size when you particularly have a focus? Just if you could elaborate on the issue of size of the group.
Well, I usually think of that group that you've described of 5 to 7 or 8 or so as a professional learning team. They usually have a very specific area of focus that they're working on. But the school the school staff as a whole that operates as a professional learning community has a bigger picture of what the students will know and be able to do after they leave that school. So they're all in it together. Don't know if that helps or not.
It sounded to me there are two important points of distinction. One, you've just made, the professional learning teams comprising an overall professional learning community, but also that element of standards and principles used for PLC. Yeah.
And to elaborate on that point just a little bit more, Sam, while the school staff as a whole has that shared vision for what its graduates will know, or in high school in particular, what its graduates will know and be able to do once they graduate, each professional learning team has an important part in making that happen. And this view of the school as a whole, as a professional learning community, helps to sort of break down the silos that often exist in schools where you have very defined only grade level teams or subject area teams. And so within the school, in such a case, it's no longer okay for one grade level or one subject area to be successful and another not to be successful. Again, we're in it all together. And so it spreads the responsibility for student learning to the whole staff because students are impacted by the whole system as well as the individual parts of the system.
Yeah, well, that certainly
that's
makes
why
sense.
I think it's important to consider the whole school as a PLC and then the different organizational groups within the PLC, the professional learning teams, all working toward the same agreed upon and shared vision of student success, their big goal.
Yeah,
now, in very large schools, I'm sorry.
I was going to say a term I've come across quite a bit in the literature is coherence, and I think that's what you're addressing there.
Absolutely. And now I can see in very, very large high schools where you may have 100 or 200 staff members that you may have to do some smaller breakdowns just to make the interactions, the dialogue among that group more meaningful. But usually in most schools of about 50 teachers, then the whole school would operate as a PLC.
Okay, thank you. That's a great clarification on that.
Okay. Are we ready to look at the dimensions then that we're...
I think so. Let's go on.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So there's a slide in there that says professional learning community dimensions, and you can see that there are 5 dimensions bulleted, with one of them having 2 sub-bullets under it. And we're going to go into each one of them in a little more detail later. But I want to give you the grand overview with that slide. Some years I had the good fortune of working with Dr. Shirley Hord, who's an internationally recognized scholar and author on professional learning communities. She conducted an extensive review of the literature and identified from that review 5 dimensions of schools that operate as PLCs. Since that time, I've had the pleasure of continuing the study of PLCs with a small group of researchers from Texas, Louisiana, and Wisconsin to understand the various ways these dimensions can play out in different settings and contexts, because it is the way it works, it's very contextual in nature. But without these critical dimensions, the term professional learning community implies only a name, and it fails to take into consideration the significant cultural shift that must occur for a school to operate in this way. This concept of a cultural change is supported in research reported by Bricken Schneider, Karen Seashore Lewis, Shannon Moran, and the importance of respect, mutual respect and trust. So for me, and for those who understand what this critical shift requires, a PLC is not an end in itself, but rather a way of working together to achieve a critical end. And of course, we can't say it enough, increase student learning. Let's take a look then at each one of those dimensions in more detail. Let's look first at the slide on shared values and vision. When a school staff operating as a PLC has shared values and a shared vision, they see their mission and goal as a common purpose across grade levels, across subject areas. And all are responsible for contributing to that shared vision. And in the case of dropouts, graduation rates, it's to ensure that students graduate on time with the necessary knowledge and skills to allow them to successfully undertake their next endeavor after graduation. The staff develops a mental image of what this vision is, of how they're going to achieve this vision, and they share an unrelenting focus on and commitment to making this vision a reality for the whole school. This vision then guides the decisions that they make, the way they use their available resources, and how they problem solve through their challenges to make the vision a reality. Now, on the next slide, we recognize that a staff can't just hold a vision for student graduation or dropout reduction and just hope for the best. It needs to establish some indicators that students are on track for success over the long term. Research conducted by the National High School Center has identified some high-yield indicators that help a staff keep students on track for graduation. 2 of these indicators are attendance and course performance. And on the next slide, let's look at attendance in a little more detail. Actually, research has shown that tracking the attendance rate of students in the first 20 days of the school year and in each quarter of their first year in high school provides powerful and reliable indicators of whether a student is going to be on track for graduation. So having this kind of information as early warning indicators really can help a staff intervene in a timely way with appropriate interventions. Now let's look at the slide that has a little more detail about course performance. As far as course performance, schools operating as PLCs can identify students who have failed one or more courses in their first year of high school. They can also keep track of students at risk of dropping out by their grade point average for each semester and their cumulative GPA. They should also be looking at the combination of the number of Fs in required courses and credits earned during the first year of high school. This combination has proven to be a reliable indicator of whether or not a student is on track for graduation. And we all know that getting off track for graduation early in a student's high school career makes it very difficult for him or her to catch up later. So it's important to keep track of those indicators. So on the next slide, here are some tools that can be used to really delve into whether the school holds shared values and vision. The sources of data that I just explained that are suggested through the National High School Center are relatively easy to capture as long as the school has a system and processes for doing so. But our data systems in our schools are getting a lot better now. But if we look at shared values and vision, we need to also think about the underlying assumptions and expectations about student success that exist among the staff, that exist really among the students themselves and with the student's family and the community. Read a little of Peter Singe's work, and he describes these underlying assumptions and expectations that people hold as an iceberg. What one can see above the surface is only a small part of what we really can't see, but what exists below the surface. So our expectations and assumptions that we all hold that lie below the surface reveal themselves in the actions we take and the decisions that we make. So it's important to have processes in a school that bring these expectations and assumptions to the surface for discussion. Tools that can help to examine these underlying assumptions and expectations might be individual and focus group interviews, surveys, rubrics can do this kind of, can reveal this data, and some facilitated conversations. So those are some ideas on shared values and vision that we've explored, and we've actually have some tools to help schools with.
And then once a school does this, do you find that the discussion of these issues help change those underlying assumptions and expectations, or are there specific strategies that have to apply for doing that?
Well, it's the discussions, but they also have to see the proof of it working with the students. So the discussions, what we have found in schools that are working to become professional learning communities, is that the discussions get much more honest, much deeper, and people begin to ask much more, just deeper questions of one another. They began to hold one another accountable for what they say and what they do. So it is indeed a cultural shift.
And I would imagine that a lot of that kind of frank and honest discussion has to do with the building of trust, which is a part of
absolutely
professional learning communities also.
The Shannon Moran resource that's on the list, I think, is a very good one for getting into the idea of trust and respect. But Karen Seashore Lewis, in her work with the Wallace Foundation, has also touched on this. It's critically important. All right. If you're ready, I'm ready now to turn to the second dimension of a professional learning community, that being shared and supportive leadership. In a school that has shared and supportive leadership, we find that leadership is distributed among a variety of leaders, including teacher leaders. However, we want to emphasize that this does not diminish the role of the principal as a very important leader, in fact critical in our view. In a professional learning community, the principal often assumes, though, the role of a facilitator of leadership across the staff. So one can imagine that the idea of shared leadership in a school that has operated for years and years and years with only the principal making all the decisions, that shift can be very challenging. We've learned that it often takes time for both the principals and the teachers to develop the skills and the processes for shared leadership. Creating some structures is a good way of creating shared leadership, and norms for open and honest discussion are some of the first steps that a school can take to develop shared and supportive leadership. That's why we advocate for a school leadership team that has representative numbers of people, especially teacher leaders, who will help to identify and solve problems. In our experience, we've found that the idea of shared and supportive leadership evolves over time, but there is great potential in teacher leadership in most, if not all, schools, and that teacher leadership does emerge if given the opportunity.
Yeah, this is an area of professional learning communities that is particularly interesting to me, having been in the role of principal and superintendent in past lives. And that is that it is a fine balance for a school leader, for a principal or a superintendent, this whole idea of facilitating and not directing or dictating all the time, but that there's real power once those skills are learned in collaboration that brings about shared ownership of expectations, and that seems to be a primary goal of PLCs.
Yeah, we concur 1,000% on that, Sam. It's been our experience too. Let's go to the next slide that really directs attention to 3 roles that leadership plays that we've found are critically important. And we know that there are many lists of leadership actions found in the educational and, in fact, in the corporate literature as well. At Segal, we don't want to oversimplify the concept of effective leadership because we know it can take many forms and sometimes be very complex, but we have been able to come up with 3 critical leadership actions that seem to be important to most school improvement endeavors. First, leaders repeatedly communicate clear expectations about, the school goals, how the school staff is supposed to interact with one another, and how they're going to solve problems. Effective leaders communicate in this way by both their words and their actions. They communicate their vision and goals in both written and spoken words every chance they have. However, we all know that actions speak louder than words, and these leaders walk the talk. While their words are important, their actions speak volumes and make their message unmistakable and clear. But we have to remember that the principal is not the only leader communicating clear expectations. The staff as a whole in the school, operating as a PLC, finds a variety of ways to express their expectations for students in the words that they say and the actions that they take on a daily basis, and in their interactions with others in the community and with parents. The second leadership role that we've identified is that leaders in high-performing PLCs see that the staff has the capacity to do the work outlined in their improvement initiatives. This may entail some critical professional development needed to raise staff effectiveness to the next level. But we all know from the work that the National Staff Development Council, Learning Forward, under the new name, has done, that professional development often comes from inside the building, and that most schools have the expertise in their own staff to increase capacity. Furthermore, we've learned how powerful coaching can be to help both leaders and teachers become more effective in what they do. And then the third role, leaders in highly effective PLCs consistently monitor and review the progress they're making, and they have processes and timelines for measuring this progress. They review both the implementation and the impact of their planned efforts at critical junctures throughout the school year. For implementation, they determine what they will look at to decide whether or not an improvement initiative that they've undertaken is being implemented the way it was intended. For impact, they determine what they'll look at to determine whether their improvement initiative is having its intended impact. These two factors, implementation and impact, are highly important to professional learning communities as they strive to meet their goals for student success. On the next slide, there's a little graphic of an implementation bridge that comes from Gene Hall's and Shirley Hord's work, one of their books. And I particularly like this graphic of an implementation bridge because you can see that a chasm exists between, on the left-hand side, the current practice, and then on the right, the changes in practice that are intended to achieve increases in student outcome. But too often, we expect our staff to go from one side of the chasm to the other on their own, when it requires really a giant leap on their part. So I ask, what would happen if we provided a bridge in our leadership actions to make the crossing of this chasm more possible? And we believe that the three leadership roles that we've just discussed will help teachers and leaders to cross that chasm and make the changes in practice that will help them realize increased student outcomes.
Yeah, I really like that graphic. I'm a visual person, and that really makes the point so well. Thank you, DeEtte, for that. We do have some callers coming in, Sam. Should we give them the opportunity to ask some questions? And Matt's been holding for a couple minutes here from Salt Lake City, Utah. So, Matt, welcome to Solutions, and we look forward to hearing your questions or comments for DeEtte Cowan.
Hi, Matt.
Hi there. Thanks so much for taking my call. I'm the editor of a website, dropouts.org, and I just really appreciate this great learning opportunity, and we're sure to share it with a lot of people. I'm wondering if Dr. Cowan can give us an example of a school that has used PLCs directly to address the dropout crisis. And I'm also wondering if it's better to set up a PLC directly intended to focus on dropout prevention and recovery, or is it best to implement dropout prevention as a mission of an already established professional learning community?
Well, start with number one, DeEtte. I guess, have you seen a school that PLC has been focusing on dropout prevention?
Well, I may have to defer to Ann on that because she is our guru for high schools, and hopefully I know that she has done some school visits that have that she's really bragged on the work that the high schools in those districts have been doing. So, Ann, you want to take it from here?
I'd be delighted to do so. There's been several schools that have really increased the maintaining power of their students through the PLC work of the staff. One that I feel very comfortable talking about is one that has actually made that giant leap over the implementation bridge. It was quite a wide gap, but the staff worked together with such power and focus that the dropout rate has just diminished tremendously. That would be in Mark Tree, Arkansas, the high school there. We started working there, nearly 9 years ago, DeEtte, and now they have achieved a great turnaround. So that would be one example. I hope that helps, Matt. And you had another question I think DeEtte was going to address.
Matt, do you mind repeating that question?
No, not at all. I'm wondering if it's better to set up a PLC that's directly intended to focus on the dropout crisis, or if a better approach is to implement the dropout issue as an mission of a PLC that's already been established.
As a PLC? Well, if we're thinking about the whole school as a PLC, it would seem that if the data show that the school does have a dropout problem, that they would include that within their improvement plan and, of course, go to the research to determine what interventions, what factors will reduce the dropout rate. And Ann's going to share some of those later in our webcast today, so I think that will be of interest to you. And then clearly define the steps that you're going to take to implement those plans and determine what are we going to measure to make sure that we have implemented those action steps in our plan with fidelity and what we expect as the impact. I think it would be useful to monitor, to use the data that I described that the National High School Center has put out as early indicators of dropouts. And a small team within a high school could have major responsibility for making sure that the plans are being carried out and that they are monitoring the data to make sure that the improvement initiatives or the graduation initiatives that are being made are having the impact that are desired. The problem is if one waits until the end of the year and then tallies up the dropout rate, that's just too late to be able to do anything about it. And I'm not sure whether I've answered your question to your satisfaction or not. But
well, I would add, this is Sam, that I think it answers the question that I had. I hope it answered Matt's question, but I really see, and I'm not the expert on professional learning communities, but I certainly see this as the kind of comprehensive approach that's needed to address school improvement. And as you said, DeEtte and Ann, if you're targeting as a part of your goals those things that we know to be indicators of risk, and that's what you're trying to improve, then obviously you're going to improve on the graduation rate or decrease the dropout rate. So, and that's very different, a very different approach, I think, from, and these are needed also, but from just specific dropout prevention programs, targeted to a particular indicator. I mean, this really gets at all of that.
Well, I think that's a good discussion here, but we are going to have to move on. And Matt, I just wanted to make sure you leave Eric with your email and your phone number, whatever, so we can get you one of our wonderful publications.
Yeah, we hope to see you in Chicago.
Yeah,
right?
Hope to see you in Chicago. Yes, thanks for calling in, Matt. And
thank you so much.
Okay, and we do have a call from Dan. He's just down the road from you. He's in Austin, Texas. So, Dan, you got a question or comment for our guest?
Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to kind of address Matt's question. I, in a previous life, worked for a number of years at an alternative high school in New York City, a small alternative high school for kids who were overaged and undercredited, and all of whom had not been successful in other schools. So I would say we were pretty directly, challenging the dropout, problem.
Right.
With some success, and I think one secondary benefit that happens is if you're sort of transparent as a staff with your students about this work, about PLCs and teaming, and what we found was that it inspired them to know that we cared that much to structure things in that way. And that was an important piece of kind of rebuilding these students' academic lives. But then we were also sort of modeling for them the kinds of cooperative work we wanted to see them doing in their classrooms and beyond high school. And so it kind of just became this really effective, interdependent relationship between our leadership, our staff, and our students.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah, it really was.
That's a great point, Dan, because what we've learned is that the students do notice what it is that the professional staff is doing and how they interact with one another. They very definitely pick up on that. So it's a great way to model.
Thank you, Dan. That was a really good observation about your past life and how things work so well there. Thank you for calling, and I hope you've left your information with Eric. He says yes. Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you for calking. Well, I think it's time. Do you have a question?
No, not a question, but let's turn to Ann now, and let's say we have the this community in place now, and we've built some trust, and we've got collaborative roles established. How then do we determine as a staff if what we learn and how we learn it in order to address student learning needs?
Well, Sam, that's an excellent question, because that is that third dimension that Dr. Shirley Hord had found in the literature. It becomes the heart of the PLC. What is it we're learning and how will we learn it? But there's some other things that the high schools need to consider that Dr. Shirley Hord has emphasized. That a PLC, just like Diet was saying earlier, is all professionals coming together. It is not one department or one small group. And the emphasis is on collective learning, because it has been shown that collectively we learn so much more than we do as individuals. Thus, the PLC is about collaboration to learn together. And so if we go to the next slide, this is just an example of an early warning system. There are many good ones. This happens to be one that was originally developed by the National High School Center at the American Institutes for Research, and actually automatically calculates those high-yield indicators DIET referred to earlier on attendance and course performance, but there's many good ones. This happens to be the one we use in Texas, and it's an excellent place to start getting data for a PLC to review and help them plan. So on the next slide, I just want to share with you the kinds of information an early warning data system can give one, whichever version one may be using. This is the Texas one, but you can see this is a cohort or group of students. And this cohort could be a house from the high school. It could be one counselor's set of students. And we're able to look at a group of students and check their progress toward high school graduation, this one being based on attendance and course performance. And those red flags we see, if you have a color version of this slide, means they have not met the threshold yet. They are in danger. It is a red flag. So we have that information at a glance in most early warning data systems, as well as on the right side you see some numerals that indicate interventions. A PLC could use this type of information to quickly assess how the work is proceeding and maybe where they need to go next. The next slide actually shows the individual student kind of data. We can see our PLCs looking at individual students too. That's so crucial to bore down to the individual level. And we see on the right side, the top yellow segment, if you're in color, or it's the top segment, is the attendance. And if it's red, the student has been flagged. The center section is academics. Again, this particular student was flagged. The third section was a Texas adaptation, but based on research, because the high school center also says other indicators for potential dropouts are failure to be promoted to the next grade, as well as disengagement. They define disengagement in such ways as how a child performs on a engagement survey, or possibly behavior issues. So we added, by the request of our high schools in Texas, the behavior segment at the bottom. Mm-hmm. So one could study those aspects and think about the interventions that one might find appropriate for students.
And both really important, I would say, to professional learning communities. By both, I mean the cohort analysis as well as individual student analysis.
Oh, absolutely right, Sam. And then once you have all your data in hand, you're ready for that next slide, and actually the work begins. It begins by looking at research-based interventions and basing our choices on data. Just for example, I've visited many high schools, and we see some that say, oh, we're going to do tutoring. We've always done tutoring and offered it. As you see, that is one example that this school has done. But they may just do it the way they've always done it. The library may be open after school. They offer tutoring. And then when I visit, I hear people commenting, the right students are not coming. We're not getting people to come regularly. I've seen schools then start collecting the data, much like DeEtte was saying, on the tools we have available, and finding out from the actual students and staff that the best times for them is before school and at lunch, and thus no wonder they weren't coming after school. So it's just a matter of actually knowing our clientele, looking at our data, and then planning our interventions. But most of our early warning data systems now have ways to track the interventions, and many, like ours in Texas, actually shows us the behavior change for the student as the intervention is being implemented.
I just want to interject here because this is exciting stuff. And on our website, we have a model program database which has over 200 effective strategies and interventions of things that have been successful for others. So it might be a good shopping place to kind of shopping for ideas once interventions are ascertained.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And because we want to be sure we're using research-based interventions.
Exactly.
So if we've got our data, let's look at the next slide and look at the fourth dimension that our PLC needs to be considering once we have our data and we're ready to move forward. Shirley Hord has the fourth dimension titled Supportive Conditions, but there are two parts to that. One is structures and one is relationships. Now, if we look at the three structures she has listed on this slide, most of us educators go, oh, you're right about time. We just do not have enough time. And then you have to look at what Shirley Hord has said about that, too. She says the time we work on PLCs needs to be during the instructional day. Mm-hmm. She says it must be adequate to accomplish substantial work. And third, it needs to be scheduled frequently and with regularity. Now, DeEtte and I, for the last almost 10 years, have been doing a lot of work with high schools and school improvement. I don't think there was one we went into, DeEtte, that didn't say we just don't have time to do one more thing. Mm-hmm. But by the time we had left, adequate time had been found. And it's a matter of the PLC really putting their heads together. And just to be specific, I know some of the high schools I've seen then take their staff meeting time and it becomes staff development time. Or the district gives away the district time so it can be turned into PLC time. I've seen wonderful master schedules on the high school level where collaboration is planned within the scheduling. I've seen organizational changes where there's teaming that releases some of the staff to learn while the others keep the students learning without missing a beat. So by looking at the research from banking time and buying time, adding professional days, there are many ways to do it. It's just a matter of the PLC deciding, finding a way to find the time to get that work for our student learning. The second structure, some people may think it's a little strange, a place to meet for community work, but again, it's such a common element that we decided to talk about it today. And if you look at the next slide, you see a lovely classroom, and it's much like the ones that we are directed to when we first enter schools and we want to start working with our PLCs and working collaboratively. And we're told, oh, you may go down to Mr. Anandas's room, you can meet there, and it's usually a beautiful room. And there's certainly nothing wrong with moving our chairs and working, and good work does come from those meetings. But the fact that there is not a collaborative setting to meet often says, how important is this work right now? And how do we really work? Because if you look at the next slide, I don't think there was a site that we left that did not have permanent collaborative meeting places for the work to continue because it was the way they worked. I want to talk about one other element there we found is very important. It's not always available at first, and that is that chart tablet. We find that the ideas, the thoughts, and the next steps need to be recorded because it makes it one, public, and two, shared. Two very important things I remember our caller said earlier. We needed to be transparent. We needed to be open on how we worked. And it becomes that way not only with the staff, but it can be with the students too. Excellent insight from that comment. Also, of course, we need to look at our policies to be sure they're aligned. And often now, technology is taking over in our PLCs and becoming a way for that ongoing communication, principal to principal, teacher to teacher, and as groups.
So do you see as technology kind of enhancing the face-to-face then?
It certainly can. I think you have to look at all 5 dimensions when you're looking at technology, and especially when Diet was talking about the leadership roles and how crucial those can be to be sure that the clear expectations, the monitoring review, and the building capacity becomes part of it. As long as we keep all that in mind, I think it would be an excellent way when we're either talking about smaller schools looking for resources or larger schools. I can just see it being a tool, an excellent way to use today's technology.
Yeah, and maybe even to extend this whole idea of professional learning communities across schools.
Yes, and the wealth that can be germinated in that way. Yes, it would be an excellent way to do that. If we look at the next slide, though, we do start looking at the supportive condition of relationships. And there's 4 aspects that Dr. Horde has shared there. And those of us that in other lives have been principals and worked with schools, and we know how very difficult that building the relationships can be. Takes a great deal of time, and it often falls on the administrator's shoulders to do so. Dr. Horde said, admits this, but a PLC cannot really proceed unless the relationships, the openness, the truth-telling all occurs. Just some examples of things that the research will show is we've seen administrators guide small groups in their work, but the focus is on their process. How are they working? And it helps build that openness and that truthfulness. We've seen administrators build the strength within their staff to visit one another's classrooms with confidence and then to hold discussions after they have visited other classrooms. And, of course, all the administrators need to lead by example. I remember last year I was visiting one principal, and he had pried the principal sign off his office door and had replaced it with one that said lead learner. So he, too,
good.
Was leading
that is
by
good.
Example.
Yes.
Yeah, and this relationships issue, I was interested that our caller, Dan, gave such a good testimonial as to the effectiveness of this in his work with the alternative high school in New York City.
Yes, and that openness, yes, absolutely a key.
Well, when we talk about students and the 3 R's or whatever, and the relationships piece applies to the adults in the school community every bit as much as it does with the students.
And we'll be talking a little bit about the students, too, because in a PLC, we do not forget anyone. You're exactly right. The 3 R's are crucial.
Yeah.
And just as so we know what relationships are, so we know what they are not. If you look at the next slide, unfortunately, this is that slide that if these are the norms in a high school, where the norm is a teacher is responsible for their own students, their own subject, that there's no treading on anyone else's territory, that you are to find your own efficient teaching routines and avoid change and be wary of changes because this too shall pass. Have we not heard that? There's no PLC in that high school. Mm-hmm. So this is just one way of looking and knowing that we still have work to do. But as Marty was just saying, the staff knows and is trying hard because we are all dedicated for our student learning. On the next slide, the students, we have to reach out to them also in our high schools. This quote is actually from a young lady that did drop out of school, because she said, if they, the teachers, had just related to me more and would understand at that point in time my life was what I was going through, where I lived, where I came from, who knows what might have happened with this student.
Okay.
So we've sort of reviewed dimensions 3 and 4 as being crucial to the PLC process, because we will absolutely not be able to move forward without our relationships, our structures, and our intentional collective learning and its application.
And just that whole relationship piece and the word trust, I think, is such an important part of that. When you read, like I've been spending the last several days reading about what sorts of activities teachers and others in the school community can be engaged in, you have got to trust each other or it's just not going to happen. Before we move on, we had someone write in with a query about something that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, was where is the website for the Model Program Database? And it is on the National Dropout Prevention Center website, which you're on right now if you're listening, www.dropoutprevention.org. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a menu item, Model Program Database. Okay. DeEtte, I think you're taking us down to the next few slides.
That's right, Marty. I'm going to take a look. We'll take a look in a little more depth on shared personal practice and your comments about the importance of trust. That really hits home in this dimension. We can see that this involves a review of teachers' practices and instructional behaviors by colleagues with the intention of facilitating continuous improvement. And as we've said before, it's a process that has to be built on mutual respect and trust. And in highly effective high schools, structures and relationships exist that make this possible. In too many high schools in which we've worked or we've helped them to improve, particularly those that are persistently low performing, this idea of trust and respect just does not happen. Unfortunately, teachers in these schools seem to be isolated within their subject areas, and they close their doors, literally and figuratively, to close their doors to any help that they could be getting from their colleagues. We find that this is one of the last dimensions to develop, actually, because it has to be built on a foundation of culture and of respect and trust. And often we've really found that a staff at the beginning, a staff that's really struggled and is somewhat dysfunctional in their interactions, will need a protocol and a coach to get the ball rolling and to help the school move along. It's painful at the beginning, we found often, but it's just got to happen. Segal has developed a protocol called the Professional Teaching and Learning Cycle, or the PTLC. It's essentially a lesson study protocol. It has 6 steps, and in the interest of time, I'm kind of watching the clock here, but I won't go into too much detail on the each step. But as a lesson study protocol, it really does start with examining the standards and really getting down to what it is that students need to know and be able to do in order to be proficient on that standard. Then it moves through the cycle, selecting instructional strategies and selecting research-based assessment strategies, planning a lesson, implementing the lesson. I forgot to say in selecting also, back on the second step on select, they also select the student work that they're going to bring back to show evidence of the effectiveness of that lesson. And then in the analyze stage of the work, they do analyze student work and then make adjustments in the existing lesson or in future lessons based on what they've learned from that analysis of student work. And you can see around the steps of the PTLC, there are those leadership roles appearing again. It's important for leaderships to communicate clear expectations about teachers, what they're going to do in these in the PTLC cycle, what kind of capacity teachers need to develop in order to interact successfully and productively in this cycle, and then how are they going to monitor and review both the learning outcomes for students, but also the quality of the interactions among the staff. More information of that is available at Segal.
And also, I just point out that that resource that I mentioned earlier, the one that's on the website that you provided for us, the Professional Teaching and Learning Cycle, goes into this in nice detail.
In a little detail, and we've got other resources that will deepen it even farther. So, on the next slide, on titled Shared Personal Practice, there are some additional processes or tools that can be used in a school to encourage this shared personal practice. So in addition to a lesson study process and examination of student work, students can conduct classroom visits with the idea, not just going into the classroom and say, well, I've been in Ms. So-and-so's classroom, but to have a focus for the classroom visits. And then book studies also are a good way to learn together about improving practice, and then to try some of the research-based strategies that may be included in the book and see how it works. All of these, however, need to be guided by improvement in a particular area that a school has identified as critical to increase student success. So these practices are undertaken after looking at the data on what it is that students need to be more successful on.
Okay, well, let's keep going here. Like you said, we're all watching the clock, but we want to make sure the information for our listeners is fully revealed. And so, Anne, I think you're taking us to the next step here as far as interventions.
That's correct. Interventions, as DeEtte was saying earlier, it is so important that we are successful with them. And she mentioned implementation and impact, two key steps that we have found crucial. So on the next slide, called Interventions for Dropout Prevention, and of course I'm sure at your website, there are research-based interventions, and I used tutoring earlier. Mm-hmm. So if we look at tutoring, because our data showed that course performance was an area of need for our students, and we decided we wanted to do tutoring, and we decided it was in the morning and in the lunchtime. Let's look at the next slide and see what we need to be looking at to be sure we're meeting our students' needs. Because for interventions, we need to be verifying that the implementation of the tutoring and the impact of the tutoring are proceeding as we want them to do so. If you have ever heard in any school someone mention, oh, we already tried that, but it didn't work, these are actually the two keys that prevent that statement from being said. On the next slide, we'll talk about how one might look at interventions from the point of view of implementation. These are just 4 sample things one might look at. If I'm looking at tutoring, I want to know on a very regular basis the attendance and demographics of who is attending. I want it by gender. I want it by ethnicity. I want it by different student programs and groups. Who am I reaching, but who am I not? And what might need to be done. And my PLC is the perfect place for that type of planning. I need to, if I'm going to improve course performance, be sure that the tutoring curriculum is aligned to the classroom. Am I using high-level impact instructional techniques that meet my students' learning needs? Our PLCs could also determine that. And, of course, crucial to improved course performance would be in tutoring, is there a great deal, hopefully, of collaboration with course teachers and the tutoring staff? So these are just examples of, there may be additional ones in different sites, of what one would need to be verifying as the implementation of tutoring proceeds, not after it's concluded. And along those same lines, let's look at the next slide where we have interventions for impact. So often people may, at the end of a quarter, end of a semester, go, the student's course performance has not improved greatly. It's too late. We've lost all that time. But if we are looking at questions as on this slide, are we determining what data to collect as in number 2? Are we determining the frequency of that data? For instance, if I'm looking for improved course performance, I don't want to wait for the grading. I want it to be regularly. I want it to be consistent. And number 4 becomes crucial, just like our caller said earlier, that we need to determine the staff and others who will review the data and adjust that intervention, because that should not only be the course teacher, the tutoring staff, but the student and possibly parent themselves all need to be part of that very transparent process of adjusting the tutoring intervention to better meet their needs. So, implementation and impact, the 2 keys to open success for all students.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that we took the extra time to cover this and emphasize it, because it really is the missing element in a lot of our practice. This whole idea of assessment of the utilization, how we're carrying forth, as well as results and impact, and the whole concept of as we go and not just at the end, I think are really crucial.
Thank you, Sam. We think that way too.
So I'm going to take it up from here. I'm going to do a quick little recap of our 5 dimensions. So if you'll turn to the next slide, you'll see that the 5 are listed there with the 2 sub-dimensions under supportive conditions. We at Segal have come to understand how important each of these dimensions is to the development of a school that operates as a professional learning community. And we've also found that the dimensions are highly interrelated, and that success in one of the dimensions enhances the development of success in another dimension. So while each of the dimensions is important, they're highly dependent upon one another. It's like the whole saying, the whole is equal to more than the sum of its parts. So it's important that each one of these dimensions receive attention by a school that is trying to become a professional learning community.
And, by the same thinking here, that perhaps if one of them is more challenging, it may actually inhibit the success of a professional learning community. So having said that, which one might be the most challenging to develop?
Well, we've found that because of the importance of respect and trust, the shared personal practice is the last one to develop. They've got to have some successes in learning collectively, sharing their ideas, sharing their values and vision, and those shared personal practice habits usually develop a little later. But don't wait too long on that, because you've got to just jump right in and get your feet wet on that. Again, often it takes someone to help facilitate that process within the professional learning teams. So that's helpful. And if we'll look at the next slide, I want to share with you a recently developed tool that will help a school identify its strengths and areas for growth in becoming a PLC. It's one of the resources listed in the resource list for this webcast. Shown on this particular slide is just the first page of this self-assessment that a school could use to determine its current status as a PLC. The tool that's available in the resources has questions related to each one of the 5 dimensions. But one thing I want to emphasize in the use of this tool is that there's really no magic number or score that determines whether a school does or does not operate as a PLC. It's a tool that simply helps a school identify its strengths and where it has room to grow. But it does provide valuable information that can be used for further discussion and for the development of improvement plans to help a school meet student performance goals. Again, how can we say this too many times? The PLC is not the end in itself, but it's an infrastructure or an internal support system for achieving shared goals for students.
It sure is, and I'll tell you, I as I think back during the presentation to one of the first 2 or 3 slides that you presented that listed the characteristics of struggling schools. It becomes really clear, I think, as you understand more about professional learning communities, how they can work to change those characteristics. And we heard that from one of our listeners, Dan, I think, an excited teacher who had taught in this kind of environment, that teachers who are part of true professional learning communities, I think, would have much higher morale, probably would want not to be absent. The whole leadership structure in that school would be different and really more conducive with a collaborative approach and a staff that is more open and trusting with one another. So it certainly has the potential for doing that. I'll tell you, this is one of those topics that can't possibly be covered fully in an hour or even an hour and 15 minutes. But you both have surely whet our appetites, and I would ask our listeners to go to the resources on our website. There's a lot more reading that you can do there and learning about professional learning communities, and feel free to, I hope I'm okay to say this, contact our presenters today for any other questions you might have. I'm sure they would be open to that and to helping you with this.
And we really appreciate your being with us. I know my mind is always expanded by this hour here on Solutions, and what I found interesting was how this ties in with the change in a school climate, which is such a big topic in the world of improving schools these days, is changing the climate, and here's such a wonderful vehicle or infrastructure, as you say, to make that happen. So thank you both, DeEtte and Ann, for being with us today.
It's been our pleasure.
I've been delighted to be here. Thank you.
You know, we want to remind our listeners, again, that this radio webcast, like all our monthly programs, will be archived on the website within the next few hours, and it will be downloadable for your iPod or your MP3 player. So you can go back and listen again and again. And do recommend that your friends and colleagues listen and watch as they can download that PowerPoint from that website and look at those resources. So this is a great opportunity for a professional development activity. You heard it, wished all your colleagues had heard it, they can. But it will be an hour or so. But please do that. And, you know, I love this feature. We're on iTunes, Sam, as you know, and this is one of my favorite parts of our program, is that we're going to live on forever in cyberspace because Solutions is on iTunes, and our listeners can subscribe to it and get each month's program to hear again and again.
Live on forever or in infamy.
Mm-hmm.
The holiday season's approaching, so we will be taking next month off, but we'll be returning in January for the new year, and so we certainly hope to see all of you with us again on the second Tuesday in January 2011 for the next Solutions to the Dropout Crisis broadcast. Thanks to all of you for listening and participating, and remember, we know why students are dropping out of school, and with research-based solutions, we can assure that all of our students graduate.